Are you stalled out on your journey towards your big goals and you feel really frustrated because you're not progressing? Well, what if I told you that you're not stuck because you're lazy, unmotivated, or undisciplined? Instead, you are stuck precisely because being stuck is working for you in ways that you don't currently recognize. And in this video, I'm going to share with you exactly why that is, that being stuck is working for you, and how understanding that is the key to actually getting unstuck and progressing forward towards your goals and to reaching your full potential. Now, for many people, the reason why they stay stuck is to maintain the status quo and the safety of the status quo. And staying stuck in the status quo is something that you might be using to avoid the uncomfortable feelings that may come along with the pursuit or achievement of your goals. So I'm going to give you some examples of this to illustrate. Let's say that Jenny wants to become a public speaker. But it's the case that when she was a kid, she used to be made fun of a lot by her class, and so she experienced a lot of public embarrassment at the time. And even though it's not something that she consciously thinks about now, and it doesn't feel like she's very afraid of public embarrassment, there's still a part of her that's very, very aware of the potential for public embarrassment that comes along with being a public speaker. And so in a way that puzzles Jenny, she finds herself holding herself back from working on the things that would make her public speaking business take off. She finds herself procrastinating and self-sabotaging, and maybe not even giving her full effort to being a public speaker. And because of all of this procrastination, it's holding her back. It's keeping her from progressing. It's keeping her from growing that business. And so she has to keep falling back on just continuing with her 9-to-5, which she doesn't want to do. She wants to actually transition to being a public speaker full time. But what Jenny doesn't realize in this situation is that there's part of her that's trying to keep her in the status quo to avoid those feelings of public embarrassment that she experienced in childhood. She's trying to avoid a repeat of the same situation happening over again, but it's happening at the expense of her conscious goals. Or let's say that Lamar wants to take his business to the next level. So he's been at the same level for many, many years, and he wants to take it to the next level. He wants to be able to expand it. He wants to be able to progress the business. He wants to be able to hire a team of people to work under him. But underneath the surface, there's a part of him that's afraid that more expansion is going to come with a lot more responsibility and a lot more work, and he's going to feel really burdened and overwhelmed. And what he's really afraid of is actually something that he experienced in the past. Maybe when Lamar was a kid, he felt responsible for the feeling states of all of the adults around him and felt like he needed to help everybody emotionally regulate, which put him in a very low power, high responsibility state. And so there's a part of him that wants to keep him small, that wants to keep him in a lower power position so he doesn't end up in that low power, high responsibility state again. But all of that's unconscious to Lamar. Consciously, it just seems like he's being lazy and he's not taking his business to the next level. He just can't seem to get himself motivated. It feels like a discipline problem to him. But in actuality, it's a part of him that is trying to keep him safe from feeling overwhelmed and overburdened by responsibilities that are outside of the scope of his control, like he experienced back in childhood. Or let's say that Jimmy feels this really strong spark of creative inspiration to start painting, but he always finds himself coming up with little excuses like, oh yeah, painting, that would just be really messy to do, and oh, I don't even have the space to start painting. And so he ends up in a situation where he's wanted to start painting for like a decade, but he just never starts doing it. And consciously, from Jimmy's perspective, it just looks like, oh, the logistics are bad, or, maybe it's a discipline problem in disguise. Maybe he has that kind of insight. But in actuality, what he's afraid of is the very thing that he wants the most. The thing he wants the most from painting is to be seen, to be able to express himself in a new medium. But what he's most afraid of is being seen and misunderstood. And part of him holds him back from the painting under the guise of, oh, there's no space, or it's going to be logistically a nightmare. Part of him is holding him back because there's a fear that if he actually starts expressing himself and then someone misunderstands him, he's going to feel less seen than he even currently does. And so he kind of quits while he's behind, and it keeps himself from being seen through expressing himself through painting because he's afraid of being seen and misunderstood. And so for Jimmy, keeping himself stuck and keeping himself in the status quo is the exact thing that's helping him stay safe from the uncomfortable feelings of being misunderstood. And maybe in early life, that was something that Jimmy experienced a lot. Maybe his parents would often project things over top of him that weren't true, or people would tend to misunderstand him. And so what he's really looking to avoid is a repeat of a past painful situation. And in all three of these examples, what they share in common is that the surface level thing just looks like a discipline issue or a motivation issue, or just like why am I not progressing myself? But underneath the surface, it's an attempt to avoid past pain. So it's trying to avoid a repeat of what has already been experienced. And so if you're stuck in the status quo and you find yourself holding yourself back, chances are there is something that's already happened in the past that you're trying to avoid having happen in the future. And staying in the status quo and staying stuck, even if it feels very stagnant, can still feel very comforting, because there's a fear of going into the unknown and experiencing the pain of the past in that unknown. Now, if all of this is resonating with you so far and you want to learn more about how to overcome procrastination and self-sabotage, I highly recommend checking out my free webinar, 3 Shadow Work Secrets to Get Out of Your Own Way and Reach Your Full Potential Without Having to Fight Yourself. And the link is down below in the description box. Also, if you would like to work with me, I also have a link down below in the description box to an application that you can fill out. And in order to discover why you're keeping yourself stuck in the status quo, you can ask yourself the question, how am I trying to protect or serve myself by holding myself back? Or how am I trying to protect or serve myself by staying stalled out? And even just having the mindset shift of recognizing that there's some way that you're benefiting from staying stuck can go a really long way for helping you find the root cause that you need to resolve in order to actually move forward. But once you're aware of what you're trying to avoid by keeping yourself stuck, what you want to do is you want to consciously and deliberately face into the feelings of the unwanted situation that you're trying to avoid off in the future. For example, if we look back at Jenny's example where she wants to be a public speaker, but she's holding herself back and keeping herself from progressing with that goal in order to avoid public embarrassment, because that's what she experienced in childhood, what she would have to do is she would have to revisit some of those experiences from childhood and start to proactively face into the bodily sensations, the feelings associated with public embarrassment. And maybe she experienced that somatically in the body as like a cold sweat kind of feeling, or a tightness in the chest, or maybe her shoulders got really tight at the time. And the feelings are really what it is that we're trying to avoid. And oftentimes the feelings can feel so intense and feel so powerful and strong because they're associated with a mind story that makes those feelings seem even scarier than what they are. But if we look at them just as sensations in the body, what they are is just tension in various areas of the body. Any one sensation might not necessarily be that intense, but once we have the big thought story associated with it, it becomes a really, really difficult thing to face with. And so the part of Jenny that holds her back from public speaking in order to avoid public embarrassment, has a whole thought story associated with that about how that means that she's not good enough, or how that means that there's something wrong with her. But in actuality, what she's really trying to avoid is the tightness in the chest and the tightness in the shoulders and that cold sweat feeling. And if we realize that all we're really trying to avoid are uncomfortable sensations in the body, it becomes a lot easier to face with those feelings. And once we're willing to face with those feelings, then it renders obsolete the need to actually self-sabotage and hold ourselves back from our goals. And it's similar to the insight of there's nothing to fear but fear itself. So oftentimes, we're not actually afraid of the thing that we think we're afraid of, not the external thing. What we're afraid of is we're afraid of feeling the feeling of fear. And so if you can make yourself willing to feel the feeling of fear or feel other unpleasant feelings, then it takes away a lot of motivation to pull yourself back and to hold yourself back in the status quo. If you know that fear is only a feeling and it's a feeling state that you can handle, then you know that moving forward toward your goals, even if it's uncomfortable sometimes, is going to be something fundamentally doable that you can handle. And I call this flattening the illusion of the feelings. Oftentimes our feelings feel like they mean so much more than they do, and they get really, really blown up into something that's far beyond what they actually are. But if you can flatten the illusion of the feelings, you realize that they're just sensations in the body. Now, it's also important to have good emotional regulation skills when you go to face with these feelings. So sometimes when we get emotionally dysregulated, that's when we get really, really caught up in the story of the emotions, and then things spiral out of control. control. But if we can stay emotionally regulated, we're more likely to be able to just focus on the feelings as a sensation themselves without getting into that spin. And just as a quick thing that you can do for emotional regulation, so you can do a lot of different things. You can stimulate the vagus nerve, you can do deep breathing, but you can also do lateral eye movements. Lateral eye movements are where you just move the eyes back and forth like this for about 30 seconds. And what it does is it brings your nervous system into a more calm state. And so any of those will work for you in terms of bringing you back into that more neutral state so that you can just focus on the feelings as a sensation without getting all wrapped into them and wrapped into the thought story around them. But like I said, when it comes to staying stuck, we stay stuck in order to avoid the uncomfortable feelings and situations that produce those uncomfortable feelings associated with the pursuit or achievement of our goals. And if you are fundamentally willing to face those uncomfortable feelings, then you have no reason to hold yourself back and no reason to self-sabotage. And so the solution is to consciously, deliberately, and proactively face into those uncomfortable feelings by revisiting old memories where those feelings came up, and doing so from an emotionally regulated state where you're just tuning into the sensations themselves. And if you want to learn more about why success feels dangerous to the nervous system, I highly recommend checking out this video right here.